I'm Stefan Canville. I'm the healthcare analyst here at Echelon. I'm very pleased to be introducing our next speaker, Dr. Thomas Sawyer, who is the CFO of Cognitivity Neurosciences. Cognitivity has developed and is commercializing CognICA, a very impressive technology. It's an AI-based test that very simply and quickly can accurately assess people's cognitive health. So, a very powerful technology. There's a lot of potential applications for it, but we think there's a big opportunity currently in identifying people at the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, given the recent approval of several new Alzheimer's drugs that target those patients. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Thomas to tell you a bit about Cognitivity. Take it away, Thomas.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So again, thanks for the introduction, Stefan, and thanks to the speakers so far for actually some very interesting discussion. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Cognitivity Neurosciences, tell you a bit about what we do, the problem we're trying to solve, and then obviously say, why is AI important in doing this? What does that add to the mix, and how does it help us to address markets? So we'll start with the problem, as is traditional for young companies, and this is really quite a massive one. So this idea about brain health, it's a huge growing healthcare issue all over the world. The one thing I'd kind of draw your attention to is really around where people have nowhere to turn. So people can be worried about their brain health, they can have issues going on, they remain undetected, people don't know how to access any sort of help for this. And that's because there's no standardizable, scalable way to detect and measure brain health at any sort of scale. So yeah, this is a problem that needs to be solved. A quick overview about our company. So we actually are a spin out from research at the University of Cambridge here in England, which was really looking at computational neurosciences and visual processing and a whole bunch of other computational vision relevant metrics. We basically noticed that this was a very, very powerful technology and have since built it into a platform which is delivering services to clinicians all over the world at the moment. We've got through our FDA CE marking NHS. The system uses AI, and we're starting to work with increasingly bigger kind of reference customers, really helping to solve this big problem about, how do you work out that people have got brain health issues? How do we see how people are progressing? How do we measure and monitor? Okay. What the sort of currency, or rather the measure that we take, is around cognitive function, or more specifically, the loss of cognitive function. If your brain function goes down, it can be caused by a number of different things. So neurodegeneration, it can be mental health issues and so on. The point is, the very first symptom that is measurable is in cognitive function before anything else. So if you want to detect early, that's what you have to do. I'll just do a super high level cover of the way that we do this, which is very different to traditional ways of asking memory questions. We do, to use a computing analogy, instead of looking at hard drive performance, we look at CPU performance of the brain. So how well does the brain process information? We do this by presenting a short stimulus to the user. So it's a short duration image, flashes at you. You say whether or not you saw an animal, which is a very important part of it. Because the human brain is tuned to be able to do this very well, and it's culturally consistent. It has a whole bunch of different advantages. And that's what allows us to collect the information on the patient or the subject that allows us to go to the next step. So where does AI come in? Well, we use AI to improve the performance of the technology. That's what it's really about for us. So this is, as Rob said, this is an applied AI. We use it to make a much more generalizable, much more consistent, much more reliable measure than traditional methods, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, what's really important, and this has been highlighted in earlier talks, is this idea of I think the polite way of putting it is junk in, junk out. There's another phrase that's a little more spicy than that. But the point is that the way that you train your AI, the quality of what you put into it really determines its performance, its output, and so on. In our case, this is expensive and time-consuming clinical studies, so these have to be very well controlled. They have to go through effectively the same way that drugs go to the market. So, because we want to be FDA-approved, CE marked, Health Canada, and so on. You then have to build the models. You have to test them on blind data of the same quality, and then you need to be able to produce performance metrics that are recognizable, that stand up. Okay, so that's first one. You train a model. It does what you think it does. The next step is, of course, to demonstrate its effectiveness in the real world. So, does it work from out with a very well-controlled and defined study, and does this model work in a whole bunch of different areas? So again, you have to go out there, collect evidence surrounding this of, does it work for real people in real situations? There's things very important as well in healthcare, which is to understand and manage the impact of errors. Which direction do they lie? Are you going to tell someone they're healthy when they're not? That's the big risk that everyone cares about mostly. We're actually very fortunate. The design of our whole setup does not allow for that, but it's again, is there a legal risk? Is there a clinical risk about using this? You need to be able to discuss that and do it. And the last point on this slide really is actually about the what we call explainable AI. This idea that what happens if people start using a black box and they start relying upon it is they stop questioning it. So it becomes something that you just run it and you do, and you get a result and you always action it the same way. This is very dangerous because particularly with small learning sets or any sort of learning sets, bias can be baked into that you just don't see. So this could be, for any other reasons, ethnicity, all sorts of things like that. It is important that you're able to describe what's in there, and indeed it should be auditable. And this is very, very important going forward for both people's confidence in it and for moral reasons as well. Okay. So the next couple of slides, apologies to any proper data scientists in the audience, because this will come over as overly simplistic, but I just want to very quickly say, why does AI help someone like us to have a better performance? So this slide here is really looking at, if you're doing let's say a standard neuropsychological test, is a score out of 30, okay? And there'll be cutoffs. So we say, okay, well, Tom is done the test. If he comes in under 22, we will consider him to be impaired. Now, a small change in that, I can get a question wrong because I'm distracted or I make a lucky guess, can put me either side of that cutoff line. So this is actually a very sort of problematic way of classifying people to make decisions about what you're going to do with them, okay? So single dimension linear scale, you can fall in or out of it very easily. The beauty of AI is that you're able to use these n-dimensional models, which mean that effectively they kind of shape around the data. So one mistake does not affect the impact, the category into which you're put. Makes them much more consistent, much more reliable, and indeed, what AI is really, really good at is recognizing patterns. We recognize patterns in users' data that match up to our very well-defined large clinical data sets, and that's what we use to drive the decision making. So performance, reliability, and consistency, that's really what AI gives for us. Now, in terms of where we are using this, so let's talk about the real world problems, the real world markets we're in there. This pyramid represents all the different segments within the healthcare industry that we're currently in use. So this goes from being used by specialists, which is where we started. Very important that you have buy-in from KOLs, the real experts in the field. Secondary care, this is specialist clinics. We've done that in the NHS in the Middle East and so on. The next level is the natural home for us in the clinical system, which is part of a regular health check. Our test only takes 5 minutes. It does not need clinical supervision, so it can be like a blood pressure test. That's really what we put to clinical systems. They like this because they do have no other way of getting this information at that level. So people go undiagnosed. There's a terrible issues around the pathway, which we'll talk about in a second. Then as we go down the pyramid, we're kind of getting further and further away from the specialist. This is an earlier point of contact with a patient or a user. So outpatient mobile testing in the middle there. We have done a number of deployments of this. This is people being able to be tested in their own homes, but these are at-risk people where you want to say, okay, you are likely to have some sort of issue coming up. We want to check you regularly, so we're straight on it. We can deal with it. You're going to have better outcomes. We're going to have better cost of care as we go forward. The home testing, the next one down is really the telehealth thing. So this is effectively, people who are healthy that are just doing regular checkups. We can deliver through the web. We can give a very objective and reliable performance, brain performance report back to the clinician. So there. And the bottom one is actually one of our biggest clients is a Japanese insurance group who do it for all their subscribers to a health and life insurance policy that are over a certain age, so over 55. They should do it regularly on renewal. Again, they realize that the reliable indication of an issue picked up early saves money and gives better outcomes for patients. So that's really what we're solving. To drill into a couple of examples here, this is one I was actually on site with the NHS in the UK this morning, looking at this one. So currently what happens around things like dementia, but and Alzheimer's, but actually other brain health issues, is that it relies on the primary healthcare person, the top doctor, to make a subjective assessment. They don't have time to do anything else. So whether people turn up and are so obviously impaired, this is what we call a barn door diagnosis. There's no need for any more than 2 minutes in front of a clinician, but they can't be helped. It's far too late. They should have been spotted, 10, 15 years before. Or you get the worried well, who forgot where they parked their car keys, parked their car, lost the car keys, left the milk out the fridge. They're getting a bit of a panic about it. They then demand to be referred to see a specialist. Again, this can be thousands of dollars worth of inefficiency there, because they shouldn't even go there. They need to be reassured of primary healthcare. This diagram here shows the vision that we're building in there. So the idea is that patient comes into the clinic for a regular check. So this is when they do height and weight, blood pressure, and so on. They can take our 5-minute test. It then feeds into the system of the clinician. When they go into the consultation, the doctor has a piece of information about their brain health that they can then action. So are they fine, normal, healthy? Great, come back in a year. If there's an issue, can we work out why? If I can't explain it, I refer you to see the specialist. The specialist then gets a steady supply of early stage patients, which are very, very important for them because they can treat them. And like Stefan said, and I'll talk again in a second about the importance of this for the new drugs that are coming to the market for Alzheimer's disease. So these are huge blockbuster drugs, but at the moment, not enough people who would be eligible for them at this early stage hit the specialist to be diagnosed. And then we can do this at-home monitoring things. People are at home. They don't need to come into the clinic for us to see how they're getting on. They can do daily, weekly, monthly, do a test, feeds back into the system. If your performance is fine, stay home, don't come in. So this is an efficiency tool in terms of the healthcare. That's the way that it's looked at by the commissioners. This is the way it's looked at for there. So we give better care, but what drives the dollar value of this is the efficiency. So, like I said, we're working towards that in the NHS and other places as well. The other one is Stefan's mentioned, and I just alluded to there. For the first time ever, there are disease-modifying therapeutics in Alzheimer's disease coming to the market. SI have one, Biogen had a kind of half one that hasn't worked out so well. Lilly last week at the Alzheimer's Association conference, which I was at in Amsterdam, have announced results. That's going to be coming soon. So these are coming to the market. But what is on the label of these drugs? What needs to happen is that they need to be a mild impairment patient. This is the first signs of deterioration in cognition. And then they need to go through a diagnosis process and have a certain protein, clustered in their brain. The system does not detect these early stage patients in any sort of scale with any sort of reliability. Using a technology like ours enables this to be done routinely without affecting, the time of the clinician. It doesn't affect the workflows and so on. Identify these patients, and then if more patients identify, the drug is worth more. Right, so very simple. It's a wide net. We catch more people rather than the really pathetic kind of narrow channel that people are coming through at the moment. So, having said all that, what's important when you are taking AI into the marketplace, particularly in healthcare? First one is like, does it actually help anybody? So you don't need to have a solution that's looking for a problem. That's not really very helpful for anybody. But particularly in healthcare or other areas where you are helping an expert, you should not be telling them that you're going to replace them. You need to be giving them a way of enhancing their job for saving time, saving on menial tasks like paperwork and so on, giving information they can actually action that's meaningful for them, fit into current workflows. You just shouldn't have to redefine everything in healthcare. That won't happen, and then also provide key metrics for performance management that matter to management. That's how you're going to get adopted. But that's really what we do. We try to make the system more efficient and give people a tool that helps them and changes the dynamic and has a big cost benefit for them. So yeah, just the last thing on us really, we are at a very interesting stage. We've been through validation, R&D. We've built the platform. We've done our regulatory stuff. We're now sitting where we're becoming commercially active. So we're bringing on clients, starting to generate revenue. But we have nice patented position, very usability, a lot of know-how in there. We are actually effectively a SaaS business, and that's what we'll work towards. So scaling and margins are good from that point of view. And yeah, we're entering a high growth phase, and it's very exciting, particularly now in this Alzheimer's situation, which seems to be leading a sea change in the way that neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's in particular is being addressed within the system. So that's us. We're on the CSE, and yeah, thanks for listening.
That's great, Thomas. Because you came in under time, uniquely, we get to do a bit of Q&A. I'm going to try and keep it short, just so that we can do a bit of catch up. But I have a couple questions, and I want to start out actually by just sort of, I think for the group here, I know you explained the technology, but I just want to explain in very tangible terms how it works. So their application is on like an iPad. And all you do as the user is click left or right to a series of pictures you see, whether you see an animal or not. So in like 5 minutes in a bit of a game-like atmosphere that anybody can use, very simple, like kind of almost literally idiot-proof technology, you can get the same validity of diagnosis as spending sort of 30 to like an hour, 30 minutes to an hour with a specialist neurologist who does this sort of cognitive assessment. So I just want people to appreciate the sort of better mousetrap that they've developed and how just tangibly how it works, so that they understand that. So that being said, you've got the CognICA has been approved. You've got some, people trying it out on I think in a relatively small scale to start, although you have signed some big insurance clients, notably in Japan. Can you talk about resistance you might be facing in the healthcare environment with doctors who sometimes see themselves as sort of like demigods who know more, sort of seeing themselves being replaced in some ways by a little 5-minute test or game that in some ways makes them somewhat redundant in the process? How's that going, and what are you facing on that front?
Yeah, look, I think resistance to change is always a thing with any new technology or process that comes out there. Now, I think that the biggest resistance to adoption for us in the clinical world was kind of a so what. So, clinicians say, well, it would be nice to do this, but if there's no treatment for something like Alzheimer's or dementia, then why would you want to know? Now, that would drive our chief medical officer crazy because he's an old age psychiatrist. And he was like, well, if you know about early decline, there's things you can do that are not, lifestyle things, exercise, eat better, do so on. So that would drive him crazy. But that seemed to be, not entirely prevalent, but certainly a common view. So that was a bit like, okay, it sounds very nice, but what would you do? The other thing I think is actually a sort of cautionary tale for small companies, which is you go in with your widget and you say, okay, you need to use this, it's going to improve your life. But actually it kind of doesn't, because without the kind of processes to surround it and being supported, it doesn't go anywhere. So all you're doing is creating an extra bit of work and an extra expense item, but it doesn't change what they do underneath. So that's really what we've ended up doing, is working very closely with clinical systems to say, okay, if you are going to take advantage of what we do, we need to build the pathway around it. And that slide I showed earlier kind of basically describes that. And that's what we're doing with the NHS. So people, you'll always find a few early adopters who are up for it and they're prepared to think about it. But the vast majority of doctors and anybody are somewhat resistant to doing anything that changes the norm. So you have to kind of create the environment for it. I think that you have catalysts for that. And I think that this Alzheimer's disease drugs thing is really helping with that. Plus the fact we've been around longer and so on. But it is a challenge. And, many clinicians are very conservative. So, yeah.
And just another question about your IP. Like, what you're doing is unique in the space. And obviously you have patents and whatnot. But can you just talk about how you're going to be able to protect and own this space going forward? If you start, gaining meaningful traction, which I do expect in the next, in the near term and over the next couple of years, how do you think you're going to maintain your unique position once people realize that what you built, and maybe trying in some ways to replicate what you have?
Yeah, so look, the first thing, the patents thing is very important, and we are fortunate in that one of the first things we did as we were spinning the company up was to apply for patents for a lot of the key elements of our technology, and they were granted and approved. So we got them in Canada, US, Japan, China, and so on. So that's very important, and that's actually to do with the mechanism and the way that we actually do some processing of that. But sort of more important than that almost is the kind of know-how and the data that we have. So The quality data that I described earlier is proprietary to us. That's internal. So that's what drives the performance of this. What we're amassing a lot of at the moment is real world stuff. So these are where it's being used in different areas that all helps us to develop not just the AI models themselves, which we will continuously develop and improve, because that's really what the product is actually the model. But also, that allows us to improve the processes around it. What's the use case? How do we get into those? So they're there. And the final thing I'd mention, which is actually quite important, is to do with the way that you integrate. Now, we have developed our software, like you said, Stefan, in the first instance, the medical device works on iPads. That was our first choice. So it is software you download from the App Store. We give you a login. You can use it there and then, okay? So that makes it pretty flexible, but that's not flexible enough. So we're now building a whole set of APIs which allow our tech to be consumed by third-party platforms. So this is on the web, through any mobile device, and so on. And then also on the back end is building up an integration unit for so health record systems, so digital health records. I think that once you start to embed yourself in these systems and become part of the habitual process, so the process I talked about, the fact that the data is delivered, straight to clinicians and so on, that is another actual sort of almost defensive position, because it's quite hard to unpick that later on, and people become very accustomed to using it. So I think those are the three areas that we take very seriously and seem to be what will do us a lot of benefit in the long run.
Well, with that, we'll thank you again, Thomas, and thank you for keeping it tight and staying under time.